Welcome to the Connected Mom Podcast, where we desire to deepen your connection with God, help you empathically connect with other moms, and more intentionally connect with your child. I'm Becky Harling, your host, and I have with me today co-host Sarah Wildman.
We're excited to be here. Becky, you are an author of several books, but one that we'll be looking at today especially is How to Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. Now, I have to tell you, I heard you introduced a few weeks ago, and I think they made a classic mistake with this title, but it's an interesting one. She introduced you and she said, Becky wrote this book, How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, right? But that's not the title of this book, right? How to Listen.
No, it's
okay,
not.
so talk to me a little bit about that, because you didn't lead with how to talk. You said how to listen. So what led you to write this book?
Well, first of all, Sarah, as moms, which you and I are both moms,
yes.
right? So you're moms of littles. My kids are all grown now, and I'm actually a grandmother. But here's the thing that moms have in common. We all love to talk, right? We give our kids a million commands every day, you know, when they're little. Make your bed, brush your teeth, don't hit your sister, pick up your blocks, you know, all the things we say. And along the way, it dawned on me that God wanted me to listen. And this was a challenge for me. And he taught me this very specifically through one of my children.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, every family, I think, needs a negotiator. And
such a great term, negotiator.
Yes. And God gave us a negotiator. So Steve and I, you know, we didn't know what we were doing as parents. In fact, we've often joked that if we were going to write a book about parenting, it would be blackmail, bribery, and a whole lot of prayer, because that's a lot of what we did. But we had this little child, Stephanie. She was gorgeous and tiny. And I'll never forget when the pediatrician, when she was only 3, said, Becky, she's tiny, but she's mighty. And I know some of you moms out there can relate to that, right? Because you have this tiny child and you think, how on earth can you have so many opinions when you're so small? But Steph had a lot of opinions. And one morning, I was on my knees before the Lord. And it was one of those mornings where I just felt like a complete failure as a mom. Every mom out there has had those mornings. So I want to give you comfort in this moment. We've all had our fair share of mom fails.
Yes.
Anyway, on this morning, as I was on my knees sobbing before the Lord, I said, Lord, I'm going to mess her up irrevocably. She's going to need a lifetime of therapy. And the Lord spoke to me very clearly, and he said, Becky, give her a voice. And I was not expecting that. I remember thinking, she already has a voice, I'm pretty sure. And he's like, no, your job as a mom is to shape her voice, not silence her voice. And so based on that, I went on this journey for really how to reshape my parenting through listening.
Wow. I love that. And you kind of hinted at the fact that you weren't the perfect parent. And I think a lot of us think somebody writes a book and you're like, they figured it all out.
Nope. They sure haven't. Don't let anybody tell you that, because it's not true.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I think we can all be comforted to know that, you know, we're all on this journey together. So what did that look like, giving her a voice, right? Because I think as parents, you kind of default, like we were talking about earlier, to just talking repeatedly. Here's this, here's this. How did that practically look in your family with Stephanie as she was given a voice by you and your husband?
Yeah. So, you know, practically, sometimes when she was really little, we would set the kitchen timer and we would say, okay, Steph, you know, go ahead and give us all your arguments. At the end, it's up to us.
Okay.
You know, at different times as she got older, we had her write proposals. That was one of my favorite things to do. And, you know, when you have them write a proposal, you have quite a bit of power as a parent. You can say, okay, it's got to have good paragraph structure. It's got to have capitals and periods, you know, so they're really working on their writing skills as they're arguing with you through this proposal. And then, we allowed her to call family meetings sometimes, to just present her
Oh,
case.
that's really cool. Did you find that that was a good strategy for your other children, or was listening to them a different beast?
It looks different with every child, Sarah. You know that you have two boys and they're probably very different. I have 14 grandchildren
That's
now. They're
amazing.
all a little bit different. I know it's crazy. It's so much fun. But in our four children, while they were all pretty verbal, I do have to say that we didn't really have shy and quiet children, but it did look different with each of them. Some were more compliant, some were a little more the negotiator
Hmm.
personality, some were a little bit sneaky at times, some were more, I want to be the center of attention. Really, I think a lot of them were center of attention people. But so you as a parent, you need wisdom. And I always like to say, like, you can read books on parenting. I mean, I wrote one of them. However, ultimately, God knows your child best,
Mm,
whether your child is 3 months or 30, whether your child is 6 or 60. God knows your child best because He wired them and designed them. And so, first and foremost, we need to go to God for wisdom on how to give these people in our life a voice because connection is
that's
everything.
right. There's a scripture that you really spent some time on in the book on wisdom from Proverbs. Do you want to share a little bit about what you learned from that?
Yeah, so Steve is my husband, by the way, but we needed a foundational verse for our family life. And so we chose Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, where it says, by wisdom a house is built, through understanding it is established, through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. And what I love about this passage is it gives us three couplets that really show us how to listen as parents within the family system. And these couplets are true, again, whether your child is a toddler, a teen, or an
Uh-huh.
adult ready to leave home. And even after they've left home, these three couplets are something I always go back to. So the first one is, by wisdom, a house is built. We could really paraphrase that: by wisdom, a relationship is built, because a relationship is precious and it's a treasure. And so it takes a lot of wisdom to build a good relationship with another
Mm.
person. And then the writer of Proverbs goes on and says, by understanding it is established. And I love that one particularly because in our home, all our kids played soccer. So, I mean, there were balls flying through the house all
Did you
the
have a
time.
soccer mom
And
sticker
no, I
on your
didn't.
minivan?
I should have gotten one,
It's not
Sarah.
too late. Or a shirt, maybe? Soccer mom.
Yeah, I do. I do have a sweatshirt that the team of three of my grandsons are on the Awesome Shark soccer team. And so they gave me a
Oh,
sweatshirt because I was the most dedicated fan.
I
So
love
it
it.
says Awesome Sharks and it has a soccer ball.
Well, I interrupted on soccer mom. You're talking about understanding, though. Understanding.
So by understanding, it's established. And really, what that word understanding means is to reestablish something that's been toppled over. And our kids are toppled over by the world. Our young adults are toppled over by the world. Maybe they get yelled at by a teacher and it hurts their feelings, or a friend betrays them and their feelings are toppled over, or they don't make the soccer
Mm,
team they were hoping
right.
for, or they don't get chosen for the lead role in the school play, or as adults, they don't get the job promotion they were hoping for, and maybe they even get fired. Our people, our kids, need to be
Mm,
reestablished. And the way that's done is by offering empathy. A lot of times, as moms, Sarah, we want to give advice,
yes.
and we
Yes.
feel like I have the magic advice that's going to solve your problem. And here's the thing: if you can solve my problem in 1 minute, that makes me an
Mm,
idiot. And nobody wants to feel like an
right.
idiot,
Right.
right? So life is
Mm,
complicated. And what the message we want to send in listening is, your feelings make sense to me. and I'm with you in this toppling over. And when your child knows that you're making the effort to understand their feelings and that they are loved unconditionally by you, that goes really far. And then, of course, the third couplet is just by knowledge, its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. We have to continually be students of our kids. What makes them tick? What kind of people do they like to hang out with? Who do they like to play with? What's their natural wiring? Are they more extroverted? Are they more introverted? Are they more passionate or more placid? I mean, you've got to know your child, and that takes becoming a student of them.
Those are some good tips. I'm writing them down as we go to remind me. Well, I was thinking too, when you're talking about the reestablished, it's a tall order, but we're really reflecting what God is to us, right? Like you were saying, I'm with you in this. I'm listening. I care. And so the parent is a model, really, right, of our connection with the Lord and what that looks like, which is a tall order.
It's very true. It is. And yet, research has shown us that the first picture your child has of who God is comes through his parents. And so we want to look as much like Jesus as we can. Now, don't freak out if you're listening to this podcast, right? Because we all have moments where we've completely blown it. However, those moments give us fabulous opportunities to apologize and say, will you forgive me? I blew it.
Yes. Well, apology wise, you had shared, I heard you share about a time, I think your kids were adults, where you asked them a really brave question, really brave, on if you were a good listener. Is that right? And can you tell us a little bit? I mean,
yeah, that's right.
That's crazy humble, Becky. Was that you and Steve, or where did that come from?
That was a conversation I had with one of our daughters, not the negotiator, but a different one who also had negotiation ability. And she was a young adult. And honestly, by that point in the journey, I kind of felt like I had really improved in my listening. And so I asked her, like, how do you think I am as a listener? And if you're going to ask your kids that, you really have to be prepared for the answer. But it opens a great conversation, because what you're really asking is, how do you experience me as a listener? And, I stood back, Sarah, thinking I was going to get rave reviews. And then there was this long pause. And she's like, well, sometimes you listen well, but sometimes you're distracted. You interrupt me a lot. And Mom, you still give me a lot of advice, and I don't really want advice, I just want to feel heard and valued. And that night I went to bed one more time and had a conversation with the Lord, kind of like, okay, I initially thought, well, Lord, maybe this is your fault because you made me an extrovert. And God is really patient with us, but I had to say, Lord, look, I want my kids who are now adults to feel loved and heard and valued, even if they hold different opinions than me. So show me what it looks like to love them well through listening. And I had to change. I had to put guards in place so that I wouldn't interrupt. I had to remind myself on the phone when I was tempted to give advice, to kind of put my hand over my mouth so that I wouldn't give advice, so that I would just listen and seek to understand them.
Do you think that question could start earlier even?
Yeah.
Than just, I just think I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, and especially my 8-year-old, he's very verbal. He'll say, Mom, are you listening? Even with your grandkids, I bet you've seen where you can kind of show that you are a listener and that connection that comes with it.
I think, I'd like to offer a dare to our moms who are out there listening. So I dare you to ask the people closest to you how you are as a listener. Start with your kids. If you have teens, definitely ask them. They'll be honest, so be prepared. Even if you have grade school kids or if you have toddlers and you're tucking them in bed at night, do you feel like mommy's listening well to you? And some kids are a little bit manipulative. I was talking with parents the other day. They're like, yeah, my kid never talks as much as when I tuck them in bed at night, and then
Yes.
all of a sudden they want to tell me everything because they don't want to go to sleep. But
Yes.
that's part of the
Yes.
treasure of raising them. And someday you're going to miss those years. So try to hang in there and enjoy whatever they tell you at that time of day. But, ask your husband, how do you experience me as a listener? Ask your good girlfriends, how do you experience me as a listener? Because I believe that listening is a spiritual discipline that we need to continue working on our whole journey with Jesus, because Jesus himself was an amazing listener.
He sure was. I think about the times when Jesus would go off by himself. There's times in the Gospels it talks about that, and you have to think he was probably listening to the Lord too. I mean, he had listened to everyone and
Yeah.
all of their needs, right? But he modeled that too, of having those times of just stillness, which can be hard, especially when you have the littles and taking that time. But what was a way, maybe when you think of your kids, maybe like before preteen years, what was a way that you were able to really sit and listen with them? Do you have an example?
Yeah, after school, I mean, once they were in school, after school snack time is essential. I mean, snacks are just really important to kids because
To me too.
yeah, well, to my husband too. I love to tell the story that I'm going to digress for just a second, Sarah, but I remember being on vacation with my husband, Steve, in Costa Rica, and we were in a grocery store picking up some groceries, and there was an earthquake where the whole ground started to shake. And we
Oh
realized there was
my.
an earthquake. And we looked at each other and said, earthquake. We started to head out of the grocery store. And Steve's famous line, now this was a 6.9 earthquake. Steve's famous line was, Beck, wait. And I stopped and I looked at him and he said, we didn't get snacks. And I'm like, so snacks were very important to Steve. However,
Yes,
I
yes.
said to him, I think we're supposed to get out of the building and then we can think about snacks just in case the whole building crashes. Anyway, it's the same with your kids. If you want your kids to talk, snack time is huge. Give them a snack. Turn off your phone during snack time, or at least put it in the other room on silent, and just focus
Hmm.
on your kids and ask them questions, questions like, when were you kind today? When was somebody really funny today in school? When were you like a hero today, And then I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge fan of mealtime, Sarah, family dinners together. And look, I know, especially once your kids get into sports, it's a challenge. It was in our home too. But we tried to make mealtime family dinners happen a bunch of nights a week, with times where there was an exceptional swim meet during dinner time or soccer meet or whatever. But, family dinners should be fun. Don't make them full of correction like, oh, would you just eat your peas? I mean,
Uh-huh.
or
Uh-huh.
would you just put your napkin in your lap? Make it fun. I heard of a family a few months ago who all dressed up for dinner in their dress up clothes to practice family dinner manners, and they made it a game. Or last night, actually, I was eating with one of our kids and their families, and they have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And so during dinner, we played Guess in 10, which is a game that I highly recommend for parents of elementary school children.
Oh.
And so somebody chooses a card and it has an animal on the card, and you have to ask questions to figure out who the animal is, what it is. And
Oh.
it's so fun. And for early readers, they can begin to read some of the questions on that card. But the key is to make family dinners fun, because you can learn a lot about your child during those times, because it's not pressured, and it's supposed to be fun.
Hmm. Yes. And in your book, you give a lot of these tips. I know you have like a huge list of awesome questions to ask, for
Yeah.
instance.
Oh, I got to add something. I got to add something, Sarah. So I know of one family that asks, what was your happy today? And what was your crappy today? And kids just think it's so funny because it's a different word than parents usually use, right? And yet they open up about it. And so they go around the dinner
Oh,
table. What was your happy today? What was your crappy? And then do you have a question for somebody else in the family? And so they've been doing that. And then they just added, and what are you thankful for today? But asking these questions, you're going to get a better feel for how your kid's day went.
that's so true. I was volunteering. I'm like the fun PTA mom. I volunteer for the
Nice.
things when the kids get prizes for acting well.
Yes.
So, I'm like, I want to be the fun person for once. But one thing I was observing and remembering about being in school myself is at school, there's a system. You are constantly being told, okay, get in this line, okay, do this test, practice this thing. And I often try to remind myself that, a child has been corrected, if you will, all day,
Yes.
right? And so I think what you're sharing is so important because if home is just full of more corrections, based on, I don't think that's the goal that we've had in mind. And you've talked about that goal of parenting. It's not correcting, right? It's the
Right. It's
connection, which is the whole point of
connecting.
this podcast, right?
Yeah. I think, especially for those of us that are parents of faith, those of us that
Yes.
follow Jesus in our parenting, somewhere along the way, we got the impression perhaps that obedience was the end all. That's not the end all. The deeper your connection with your child, the better chance you have of your child actually growing up to follow Jesus and embracing faith, because if you're overemphasizing correcting all the time, they're going to grow a little bit they're going to grow a little bit maybe hard-hearted towards you. And they're going to want to back up. I mean, think about it, Sarah. We don't like to be corrected all the time or scolded all the time. In fact, I was thinking, I can't remember one time in my life where I've been scolded that
Hmm.
it resulted in changed behavior. I changed because I fell more in love with people, or I saw Jesus modeled in them. And that was something that I had to really think about as a parent, because I mean, we were all taught train up a child in the way we'll go. The thing is, that's not even what that means. It means train the child in the way he should go.
He should go.
Know your child and train them towards that direction. But it's not, Jesus was very gentle with children. We have all these pictures of Jesus with kids on his lap, and in every painting the kids are sitting still. Have you ever noticed that? I don't
Yeah,
think that's the way
somehow
it
I don't think so.
was. I think they were
No, they're
wiggling and
probably jumping on
squirming.
him.
Somebody was probably
That's a good
pulling on
point.
his hair or his beard or whatever. But Jesus loved children. And I think as parents, we need to emphasize connection more than correction.
Mm, so good. So good. It's a good reminder. Now we talked about more, little kids, maybe elementary age, but then there is this story that I think is just such a great example. When you're raising teenagers, and there was a big meltdown. If I'll lead with that, and I think this story really, this is probably one of my favorite takeaways from reading the book and just hearing you tell it. So if you'll tell our listeners, I think it's
Yeah.
really
So
special.
it was one of our daughters. She was about 16 at the time. And I went into her room to talk to her. She asked if she could talk to me. I went in there, and there was like this big meltdown, lots of big emotions. Sometimes we talk about little kids having big emotions, but our
Mhm.
teens have big emotions
Oh,
too.
all
And
those hormones.
yeah,
So fun.
right,
So
right.
fun.
And in the conversation, I got defensive because I thought she was really attacking me. I felt attacked by the conversation. And so I kept trying to defend myself. And the more she tried to explain, the more I tried to defend myself and but this and but that and but the other. And it was just going south really fast, you know? And finally, my husband, Steve, knocked on the door and came in and said, "Hey, Beck, can I take over?" And I was like, happily, you know? So I left the room and Steve just pulled her, our 16-year-old, onto his lap and said, "Tell me more." And you know, she just dumped and poured out on him. And it turns out that the meltdown actually had nothing to do with me. You know, she was maybe frustrated with the way I was answering her. However, the meltdown had to do with the pressure she was facing in AP History and AP English. She was frustrated with her friends. She could sense some things going on in the church we were serving that she wasn't happy about. I think as parents, when there's a colossal meltdown, when there's big emotions, kids can't respond to you correcting them or defending yourself. Their brain can't even handle that. And so the best way you can minister to them in that moment is say, "Tell me more. Tell me more." Just let them dump. And actually, that holds true even with adults. So if you've got adult kids and they're pouring out their heart to you, the best thing you can do on the phone with them is just say, "Tell me more." Stay
Which,
curious.
like we said, kind of goes against our nature, because I think the best intent as moms is that we want to fix it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to go in there, and that's usually why the advice is there. You don't want to see your child in this terrible pain of emotion, right? But I think you're reminding me that maybe it's that release of emotions, right? And feeling heard and connected that actually helps them. That maybe is the fix, if you will, right?
Yes.
Is feeling that connection. And that kind of runs counter to what we think. It's like, okay, in my parenting book, let's see what I say to this one.
Yeah.
And it's like actually not saying anything, which is also just a lot of grace on us as parents, right? To maybe not always have the answers to everything, right?
I'm reminded of the psalmists, Sarah, because in the Psalms, the psalmists really dump their feelings authentically on God. And it's in the dumping that there's release, right? And then the Holy Spirit meets us in that place and shows us what to do next. And so, you know, as parents, as moms out there, I want to encourage you. Put some effort into your listening skills. Go back to God. Spend time on your knees or, you know, in bed at night, pray, or early in the morning before your kids are up, pray. Spend time with God because He's the one that ultimately has wisdom for your kids. So ask Him. And when you don't know what to do, don't panic. Most of us have had moments, everybody has had moments where we've had not a clue, but we go back to God and we say, "Lord, we need wisdom with this child." And then set your focus on understanding to reestablish them, and then become a student of your child so that you know them well, know their friends, know their likes, their dislikes, what they're good at, what they're not so good at, and parent from that posture, and it's going to go a whole lot better.
That's so good. It's a good summary, Becky. We're about out of time, but I was trying to think if there's any other things we wanted to make sure we included in this episode. Maybe some of us have tried and failed some of these strategies. What's some encouragement you might share with us as we, head into this day or head into tomorrow, and we're listening to this and trying to reestablish ourselves? What's some advice you would tell yourself?
Failing, we're all going to have mom fails, right? We need to start including that maybe in the podcast, our best mom fails. I mean, times where you just, you forget that a project's due at school, or times where, you just completely blow it with one of your kids. The great thing about that is it's an opportunity to apologize. And home should be a place filled with grace. The world is not always filled with grace, but home should be a place filled with grace. So, as you're apologizing to your child, you give them an opportunity to exercise their grace muscles. And I kind of love that. All along the way, Steve and I had times where we would say, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me because I blew it today? And they will forgive because sometimes I think they're better at forgiving than we are. Go back to the Lord. Spend time in prayer today. The deeper your connection with God, the deeper you're going to be able to offer connection to your kids.
So true. And again, I do want to promote this book because I think there's so many pieces of it that are helpful at honestly any life stage of parenting, but how to listen, Becky, not how to talk.
Right.
So your kids will talk, right? That's the goal, is that they are talking, not us. And I just love that slight change of word, because I think it's really a powerful way to, as your subtitle says, deepen your connection and strengthen their confidence. I think that's what we all want with our kids. So thank you for taking the time today to do this.
Yeah, thanks for co-hosting with me, Sarah. You're incredible. And hey, friends, join us next time for the Connected Mom podcast, where we're having real conversations about how to stay connected with God, your fellow moms, and your child. Thank you for joining us today.